Delegates, advisors, esteemed chairs, welcome to the 7th annual Haberdashers Boys School Model United Nations for 2015. My name is Gordon Howe. I will be one of your presidents of the General Assembly for this weekend, and I hope that you enjoy all the events that will happen over the next 3 days. Before we officially open proceedings, I'd like to welcome Aske, a fellow president of the General Assembly, who will be running through a safety briefing.
Most highly esteemed Secretary Generals, fellow Presidents of the General Assembly, Chairs, distinguished advisors, and honourable delegates. Good evening. My name is Aske. I'm one of your Presidents of the General Assembly and the head chair of what I'm sure will be quite an exciting Human Rights Committee. First things first, welcome to HABS. You've all been selected to represent your schools because you have something really great to contribute to the weekend. You make this conference what it is, and it's so great and really exciting to see you all in one room, which is a good thing because you've now made me excited. So that's a good start. Now I have the slightly less exciting job of updating you on some logistical matters you'll need to know about, so I'll try and keep it interesting. So in the unlikely event of a fire, please leave the building you are in through the nearest exit and then assemble on the AstroTurf, which are down that way. In your welcome packs, you'll find a clear diagram showing where the different schools should arrange themselves on the AstroTurf, and we don't have a fire drill scheduled, so if the alarm does go off, it is genuine. So leave quickly, evacuate quickly and calmly to the AstroTurf. The conference is alcohol and smoking free, so please don't consume alcohol or smoke on the school grounds. Anyone who is found breaking this rule will be referred to the advisors and the organising committee and more than likely asked to leave the conference. With regards to timing, your committee will start promptly at 9 tomorrow and on Sunday. Please try and arrive punctually because your chairs have a really strict timeline to adhere to. It's very difficult to, and so we will have to start without you if you turn up late. If there's a medical emergency or any other type of emergency, don't panic. Just let your chairs know or anyone with a walkie-talkie know about it. Each committee has a first aid bag and we have plenty of qualified first aiders on site to take care of your every need. With regards to toilets, this is a particularly good one to take note of. Only female advisors will be allowed to use the female staff toilets. Female delegates should use the disabled toilets and male delegates should use the normal boys student toilets. Your chairs should be making it very clear to you where the nearest toilets are. Of course, this goes without saying, please be respectful to our school and our buildings. Don't throw chairs around, break any tables, smash windows in frustration because that resolution you argued against got passed. I know that sounds ridiculous, but one of our previous PGAs actually did manage to break a table while climbing across it, so please don't do what he did. As well as respecting the rooms and the buildings, please also respect each other. We're here to grapple with some of the world's really meaty, biggest problems. There will be differences in opinion. Respect those differences. At the end of the day, that's what this is about. We're here to have a friendly, fun, happy time. Don't let these differences in opinion, culture, or background spoil the fact that we are people united and engaged in debate. At the end of the conference, the chairs will decide the delegate awards and the PGAs and sections will decide the delegation awards. So we have 3 categories: highly commended, distinguished, and best. And the decisions will be based on the following 4 factors. Firstly, effectiveness in constructive debate. The second, accurate representation of your country's policies. Thirdly, negotiation and consensus building skills. Fourthly, adherence to parliamentary procedure. Do please have a look at the various documents in your welcome packs. Our reprographics team has assembled a phenomenal amount of useful information, including most of the things I've just been talking about, and even more. So also included are maps of the campus, the timetable for the whole conference, and the school of the country you've been sending notes to all morning. Finally, if you have any questions or problems, then please do not hesitate to ask anyone wearing a non-coloured badge, or even better, someone with a walkie-talkie who will be able to get in touch with anyone immediately. We're here to help and hope you have a really memorable conference. That's all from me for now. I really hope that each and every one of you takes something positive out of this weekend, be it the chance to speak publicly, develop a new relationship or two, and even the satisfaction of trying to think through a practical solution to a very real world issue. And one last thing before I sit down, that is, we have found an iPhone 5C, it's yellow, so if that is yours, please find me after this and it will be returned. Thank you for listening.
Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Hamilton, the headmaster of the school, to address you visiting delegates and to bless the conference.
Gordon, thank you very much. And as the old song goes, bonjour, bienvenue, and welcome to some 430 of you, lots of different schools. My very best wishes for a magical, mystical weekend, during which I hope you're going to be able to persuade, cajole, cooperate, debate publicly and privately. And those are some of the real skills for life that you're going to learn. Present, how to negotiate, to listen, to press home points with purpose and of course with humour. And how about knowing when to move forward and when to pull back, how to form alliances, how about manipulating process and procedure to your advantage, and how about publicising your policy. All far more interesting than the grind of examination study. So I hope you leave on Sunday having become an even more confident public speaker and debater, and they are not necessarily the same thing. I hope you have an immense amount of fun, meet new people, make new friendships. I hope you experience just how hard it is to negotiate, how hard diplomacy is. Perhaps you'll become a little bit more globally aware, including knowing about the UN itself, what it can and it can't do. And you'll have had the opportunity to control a country for a day or two. Not every one of you gets to see things or issues through the eyes of Yemen or Italy or USA, but that's what you'll be doing this weekend. I hope you also leave knowing how important critical thinking is, and let's add to that teamwork and leadership, because without it you will not carry the day. And at the end of all of that, the realisation that there is no substitute for thorough research and preparation if you want to win the argument. With that said, I'm now going to smash the proverbial champagne bottle over the prow of the good ship HABSMUN 2015, and of course bless all who sail in her. I hope you have a lovely, lovely time.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for that blessing. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Keith Black, the CEO of Haberdashers, as are this year's keynote speaker for HABSMUN. Mr. Black will be giving us a talk on the growth of trade and business over the past decades and how important it has become in today's globalised society. Please welcome Mr. Black.
Thank you, Gordon. Good evening. It is a huge honour to be invited here tonight, and thank you very much, Mr. Secretary-Generals, for asking me to join you. The United Nations is itself a remarkable institution and has been at the centre of world affairs since 1945. Whilst many argue its merits, at its core, it works to make the world a better place. And although some individuals and some countries might use its platforms for wrong or misguided ends, it has provided world leaders and governments with a structure to manage international issues and concerns. There have been many spectacular speeches, from Nikita Khrushchev banging the desk with his shoe to Fidel Castro's 4.5-hour debut speech. Don't worry, that's not my plan tonight. My personal favourite was the leader who said, "Friends, yesterday we stood at the edge of the abyss, but today we have taken a great step forward." Well, the world still stands at the edge of an abyss, whether in Eastern Europe or the Middle East, or through global warming, epidemics, pandemics, or other environmental, natural or man-made disasters that forever loom over the horizon. The good news is that it has always been so, and we're still here. The bad news is that, well, we don't know what the bad news is. Human beings are terrible at accurate prediction because we just don't know what is round the corner. Which, by the way, is why I love the Noah principle, which states that there are no prizes for predicting rain. The only prize is for building an ark. Oh, and by the way, it's easier to invent the future rather than predict it. And I hope that's all your ambition. Anyway, human beings have only got where we have by making intelligent guesses about the future. So we study history to see if we can see patterns that might repeat themselves. And we watch current affairs to see if we can detect small changes that might have large implications. But there's so much out there that it's generally very hard to see the wood for the trees. How often those patterns can be illuminated if the data is narrowed down and a point of view is taken. And sometimes that is best achieved through the specific details of an individual or a family as it threads its way through history. So tonight I want to tell a story that illustrates, I think, some of the themes relevant to HABSMUN. I will talk about globalization and multiculturalism, the changing face of international trade, industrial relations and human rights. And I will tell that story through the prism of a particular family, mine. The Black family is from immigrant stock. We arrived in this country, in Manchester actually, at the end of the 19th century, together with many tens of thousands of impoverished Jews who were fleeing the harsh conditions of Tsarist Russia, forced conscription, pogroms and extreme poverty. Jewish immigrants to this country were generally encouraged because this was Victorian England with all its huge industrial might, desperate for low-cost labour. They weren't, though, always entirely welcome. Similar to today's immigrants and that debate, there were anti-alien movements against them. And eventually, I don't know if you know this, an Alien Act was passed in 1905 which restricted much of the immigration. Fortunately, however, my family were fine and accepted and settled in what my father has described as a slum area, a slum neighbourhood. Factory conditions were, of course, dreadful. Pay was terrible, hours were long, and there was certainly no such concept as health and safety. But they worked hard, firstly as machinists in a raincoat factory, and then subsequently they started their own small workshop. Because it always rains in Manchester, they made waterproof clothing, and they grew their business. Consequently, my father's parents made enough money to send him to the best grammar school in the area, Manchester Grammar School, to give him what all immigrant families want, a fantastic education. He graduated and was 18 when World War II broke out. So he was conscripted into the British Army, where he served in North Africa, the legendary 8th Army. And at the end of the war, he returned home and joined his father's small manufacturing workshop, determined to create a much bigger concern. Now, these were still the great days of British manufacturing. It is hard to believe today, but in those days, British shipyards were building the biggest ships in the world, and the country had the second largest car industry after the United States. It had legendary industrial companies, and all around the north of England and further south in the industrial Midlands, the so-called Black Country, there were giant factories with tall, belching chimneys that had literally turned the buildings black, and they employed millions of people. And this is 60 years ago. For instance, the textile industry, at its peak, commanded half the world market, with India and China the biggest consumers of British-made cloth. And during the 1950s, as international clothing restrictions were lifted and consumer spending recovered, my father's business grew rapidly as he opened factory after factory making raincoats for British consumers until the late 1960s when he decided to sell out. Now, he sold his business because the writing was on the wall for much of British industry. Poor industrial relations were leading to low productivity. Misguided government interventions, a series of financial crises and high inflation, otherwise known as the British disease, were simply suffocating British industry. And a deeper threat was around the corner. Asia. for so long a victim of colonialization, war, and revolutionary turmoil, was transforming itself dramatically. The rise of the Asian tigers, Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Thailand, were copying the Japanese model and bringing prosperity and economic vigor to the region. India and its new neighbours, Bangladesh and Pakistan, were also pursuing reform and economic growth. And then, of course, occurred probably the most important political and economic event of the last 50 years, President Nixon's 1972 visit to China. Until then, China was a country almost completely isolated from the rest of the world. And as the West was allowed to peer through the hitherto impenetrable bamboo curtain, we saw a nation of over 1 billion people with a per capita income of less than $200 a year. And this was a country stirring from its slumbers. And so in 1977, nearly 10 years after selling his family business, at the age of 56, my father bought a very small wholesaling company and started importing from Asia. The prices were much lower and loved by British consumers. I joined him 3 years later, by which time he'd become one of the first Western businessmen to visit China, buying school bags actually on his first visit. As we spent more time in China, we saw the potential to buy clothing, and we then started a brand of outdoor clothing and footwear called Regatta, which I expect many of you know. And it's now joined by its sister companies, Craghoppers and Dare to Be. And during the later 1980s, we went to Bangladesh, found factories, and repeated the cycle of making great quality product at very competitive prices. Now, by this time, of course, British manufacturing was in a terrible state. Those issues which had worried my father in the late 1960s had done their damage to the country's industrial base. All those mills and factories had closed down as production had moved offshore. Unemployment soared because industry could no longer compete. After 200 years of industrialization, our economy needed to be reinvented. But the very opposite was happening in Asia. 1970 over there was like 1770 in the West. Those economies were industrializing at an incredible pace, fueled by cheap labor, low currency rates, liberalized trade. Capitalism was working its magic as those economies grew at remarkable rates. And now, for example, we all enjoy the benefit of mass market, low value clothing. Companies such as Primark and H&M sell what is practically disposable fashion clothing. And the supermarkets sell huge volumes of low-cost clothing under the George, F&F label and others. From Nike to Next, from Adidas to Abercrombie, we are all consumers on a scale that no one in history has ever experienced. So, in a period of roughly 40 years, Asia became industrialized, a process that took the West about 150 years. And now the pendulum is starting to swing back. Asian manufacturers are increasing their wage levels at a much faster rate than the Western economies are. Poor working conditions are now being replaced by modern facilities, and responsible businesses ensure that workers in countries with, let's say, less advanced attention to worker rights are ensuring that those workers are not exploited and are taken care of appropriately. And of course the Chinese, once one of the poorest nations in the world, now have an average capita of $3,000, up from $200 in 40 years. Maybe not middle class by our standards, but when I go around China, these days I see a modern economy full of ambitious, clever and dynamic young men and women. And prosperity has enabled the nation to transform itself by educating its youth and developing its civic society. And remarkably, back home in this country, we're now starting to see the rebirth of clothing manufacturing. As the East gets more prosperous, so the cost of production increases, and together with the economic and environmental cost of transport and the need for fast fashion, as well as the huge benefits of modern machinery, we're witnessing a revitalization of the clothing industry in this country. It's small and it's fledgling, but it is happening. the wonderful cycle of capitalism is turning, and I wonder if at some stage in the future I, or maybe my children, will be clothing manufacturers once again in this country. So what has all this got to do with you and with HABSMUN? Well, during my research on you, I can see that you're very engaged with human rights and global affairs. And it's my very clear view that responsible and good business leaders must be engaged with these issues. As I hope I've explained, commerce has the capacity to change the world for the better and sometimes for the worse. Commerce transformed the West in the 19th century and transformed the East in the 20th century. And business leaders must continue to encourage and advance human rights at every opportunity. Business can play a role in bringing communities together. For example, in my own business, my office in Israel works very closely with Palestinians in the West Bank. Business crosses all barriers. And as we've seen in China, prosperity through commerce has completely transformed the country so that in 40 years it has moved from being one of the poorest countries in the world to one of the richest. And there is no doubt that the wealth that has been created in Asia is trickling down through society. Much still remains to be done. But as governments and business work hard to improve working conditions, to protect worker rights, and together create new consumers, so wealth will spread quicker and quicker across the globe. And it must be a win-win scenario, where capital, labour and government join forces in recognising that entrepreneurial vigour, human rights and responsible citizenship can make the world a much better, safer and more prosperous place for everyone. Thank you very much. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, if anybody would like to raise anything.
Don't you think that, particularly in China, for instance, where the government have refused to mechanise the agricultural services because it would just result in widespread redundancies because 90% of the population involved in agriculture, that we're seeing that actually China hasn't coped as well, as you say, with the arrival of capitalism?
Well, there's no doubt about it, China's struggling, unquestionably. You just look at the environment and the pollution that is going on over there. But it is changing. On the ground, where I see it, there's no doubt about it. The governments have been closing down factories. We had issues with dye factories, with use dye stuffs to colour garments. And they were closing these down. The factories that weren't responsible, that weren't licensed, that weren't looking after the environment, they've been closing them down. It's a 40-year process that's taken place, and China is still a dictatorship, isn't it? I mean, there's no freedom in the country the way we would recognise it. So they've got a huge number of challenges to take on. But I mean, within China, I think there's something like 500,000 protests that go on annually. We don't necessarily see them all, but at all sorts of local level, the people are trying to stir up and trying to demand change. And the country's very scared about it. What they're trying to do is they're trying to shift their economy to more of a consumer economy. So they're being less reliant on exports and they're developing their own infrastructures. I don't know if you've been around China, but the roads and the trains and the airports and the building are just been colossal. And it's a big risk for the world, because when that derails, as it is probably likely to do at some stage, there could be big economic risk for everybody. But I would agree with you, they've still got a lot to do.
Sorry, you mentioned that the pendulum is swinging back to the UK, especially in reference to clothing manufacturing. But I was curious as to whether you could give some examples of this, insofar as I assume the health and safety regulations in the UK are going to be far more rigorous than those in China and the tiger economies. And furthermore, the only English clothing manufacturer that I can really sort of have in mind is Bowden, which manufactures in the UK, but does so bringing with it a high price. So I just wondered if you could give some examples of where the pendulum is swinging back in terms of cheap English clothing manufacturing.
You mentioned Bowden. I mean, Bowden are an importing company, essentially. They're not really, their marketing is very English-friendly, but a lot of their product is imported from China as well as from Turkey, places like that. Yeah, but it's happening all over the country. There's an initiative that that's taking place in Manchester. And about a year ago, there was a conference actually in my office, because I happen to know a few people, and a whole bunch of British manufacturers came to my office, and there must have been a conference of about 30 of them, and they're small workshops. A lot of it is down to fast fashion, because the companies like Topshop and other fashion companies want much shorter lead times. So they're looking at, Zara is brilliant in Spain. Zara turn around product in about 3 weeks. Now it takes me from China to bring stock in on a boat about 6 months, basically, from the time I place an order to the time it lands here, it's roughly 6 months. So if you've got a local factory in the Midlands or in the Northwest or in Scotland, they can turn around that product within a few weeks. And you'll actually be quite surprised how many of the fashion companies, and some of the smaller fashion companies as well, the more boutique labels, are using British factories today. I mean, it's still small, but there is room for hope that it might return, because Asia is putting their prices up. The cost of labour in Asia, probably salary increases in China are about 10% a year. In the UK, they're 1 or 2% a year. So it won't take too long before the Chinese will start to become too expensive. And so the guys who are producing at the moment are in at the start of the curve, if you like.
Do you feel that Britain is proactive enough in its role to trade with emerging economies in Southeast Asia, or do you feel that it's still too Eurocentric in its international relations and trade?
Sorry, who is too Eurocentric?
Britain.
Well, it depends on the industry. When you're a businessman, yes. I mean, for instance, I export a lot to Europe. I've got offices all over Europe, and we export to Europe. And we export to Europe. I don't export to Asia, partially because I import from Asia, but I've got strong brands, so I actually could export to Asia. But as a family businessman, it's a long way away. I'm comfortable buying from the product, but selling into that market, it's much higher risk, and it would take me a lot longer to get established. So there are understandable reasons why British industry is Eurocentric. But I think you're absolutely right. We're going to have to learn to go not just to Southeast Asia, but to South America as well. And as wealth levels increase throughout the world, there's no reason why Britain shouldn't be a much stronger exporting country. But it's a much higher risk. You can go over to, I was in France last week, or in Germany next week, easy to get to. And I can be there regularly. It's a long way away, and those issues can't be underestimated. Last question, I'm sorry.
If Britain left the EU, how would that affect its import and export markets in Europe?
Switzerland isn't in the EU, and Norway isn't in the EU, so, and these are strong economies. It would be bumpy, it would all depend what was to happen to freedom of movement of goods. And I mean, the argument is that we could leave the EU and still have freedom of goods. If that happened, the impact would be minimal. But as they would move their regulations on, we wouldn't be able to have a say in what was going on there. So I don't think it would be a good idea for us to leave the EU. We're in. I was never sure about us going in the first place. I thought that was a problem. But now we're in. I think it would be massive if we were to leave, and I don't think we will. Is that? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Black, for that very fascinating talk. Now, could I ask that you please all stand as the headmaster and Mr. Black leave the stage. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you, delegates. Delegates. We would now like to invite all the head chairs of each of the committees at HABSMUN to give a short speech to introduce the topics that they'll be debating over the weekend. So I'd first like to welcome the Design Committee.
Secretaries General, Presidents of the General Assembly, delegates and advisors. Good evening. I'm Boaz, your President of the General Assembly, and I will be joined as Head Chair of the Disarmament Committee by Hannah and Geoffrey. This year sees the Disarmament Committee tackle 3 pressing and controversial topics. The first of these, the question of restricting the production and stockpiling of weapons of mass destruction, is a question which grows more important with each passing day. With an increasing number of nations arming themselves with WMDs, the potential for their deployment also rises. I look forward to seeing how delegates tackle this important issue, where a one-size-fits-all policy is neither appropriate nor realistic. Secondly, we will be debating the question of preventing the acquisition of small arms by terrorist organisations. This question is one with many different dimensions, and with the emergence of strong rebel groups, such as IS, this issue is as pertinent as ever. The solving of this issue is essential not only for nation security, yet also for the peace of mind of all citizens the world over. Finally, the Disarmament Committee will be tackling the question of child soldiers. This was the first ever question I actually wrote a resolution to, and also the first question I debated some 5 years ago. Unfortunately, since then, the number of child soldiers used has increased. I look forward to seeing what new and innovative policies delegates can put forward to tackle this problem. Most importantly, delegates, I hope that we all work together to have a productive, friendly and fun committee which we can all enjoy. Do feel free to come up to me if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you for listening.
And now for the Human Rights Committee.
So, as I've already said, I'm Aske, the head chair of the Human Rights Committee. And alongside my co-chair, Sarah Cameron, and Georgia Davies, who unfortunately is ill, so won't be joining us tonight, but hopefully will be with us for the rest of the weekend, we will be debating the question of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender rights, the question of human rights violations of anti-terror actions, and the questions of disclosing and withholding sensitive information stored on the internet. These 3 questions are all very current and relevant topics that affect a wide range of people, and many of us sitting in this room. The question of LGBT rights sets the stage for an exciting future human rights reforms that we are currently living through, and is a topic all of us here will be very familiar with given the controversy over actions in Russia. One's privacy on the internet is an issue that everyone should be aware of. Given the vast popularity of social networking sites, it therefore seems of very immediate importance that we tackle the possibility of a violation of our right to privacy and the most intimate details of our daily lives being intruded upon. Finally, in the ever increasingly cautious world that we live in, we try and find a simple answer to the question, are these anti-terrorist measures protecting us or simply invading our lives in almost a Big Brother-esque manner? Given the recent controversy of Edward Snowden's actions, relit by the success of his recent documentary, if any of you have seen it, it seems apparent that this is a question that strongly divides opinion, and so will be, I think, a particularly interesting topic of debate. Myself and my co-chairs hope that the delegates will tackle the problems maturely and from different perspectives, and hope that we can come up with some very exciting outcomes to these very exciting questions. Thank you very much.
And now for the Political One Committee.
Secretaries General, fellow Presidents of the General Assembly, delegates. Good evening, and I would like to introduce the Political One Committee. My name is Alec Moore, and I'm going to be joined over the weekend by my co-chairs Jazz Knowles and Alec Ashley. Now, the topics up for debate in our committee are the question of conflict in the Ukraine, the question of the sovereign status of Palestine, and the questions of the elimination of barriers to free trade. With tensions building as we speak over the Crimean Peninsula, Putin has actually just declared that the 27th of February should be known as Special Forces Day, marking the achievements of the military operation to seize the Crimean Peninsula from the Ukraine last year. Therefore, we want delegates to look at the different angles of the problem, such as Putin having declared a ceasefire while technically having no Russian troops present. Now, the sovereign status of Palestine has been a pressing issue at the forefront of global media for the past few years. The decision of the United Nations to recognise Palestine as a full member state, or to see Palestine as an observer state, will have huge consequences on the quality of the debate in the actual United Nations, and also the quality of debate we will have in future model United Nations. And it will also influence the way the United Nations can help in solving issues peacefully within the Middle East. We want to see delegates examine the pros and cons of Palestine possibly having this new status, and what will the consequences be of such a decision, whatever the outcome of the decision. Now, the elimination of barriers to free trade is a topic that needs to be examined very carefully. Although the ultimate aim is for all nations to be able to trade equally and freely, we hope delegates will put forward resolutions that have considered what will happen if certain delegations will have no barriers to their trade and dominate an industry. These are all important world issues, and actually relates directly back to what the speech we just heard, which is something that we think our delegates can draw great inspiration from. And we look forward to hearing effective debate and constructive debate over the weekend. Thank you.
And now for the Ecology and Environment Committee.
Good evening all. My name is Colin Senkrang. I'll be chairing this year's Ecology and Environment Committee along with my co-chairs Aurelia Van Dam and Sam Roberts. In this year's Ecology and Environment Committee, the delegates will be tackling three particularly important issues, those being the question of environmental damage caused by conflict, the question of protecting endangered aquatic species, and the question of reducing carbon emissions in developing economies. Now, delegates will need to consider the range of intertwined social and economic factors involved in these three very pressing modern issues. And we'll have to think about making ambitious yet realistic solutions to these very complex problems. We all look forward to a weekend of very engaging and subtle debate. Thank you.
And now for the Political 2 Committee.
Good evening. I will be chairing the Political 2 Committee alongside my world-class co-chairs, Ariel Cohen and Amelia Sinclair. The topics we will be discussing this weekend are about the armed conflict in Colombia, civilians joining foreign militant groups, and corruption in sub-Saharan Africa. The conflict in Colombia has displaced millions of people and caused immeasurable suffering. After decades of bloodshed, it appears that it may currently be in its closing days, but it's as volatile as ever. Our aim is to ensure that the current peace is maintained and that it delivers safety and justice to as many people in the country as possible. The problem of civilians joining foreign militant groups, such as IS, is one that, while not necessarily affecting millions like our other topics, has a profound effect on the families and communities of those people coming from here in the UK, as well as many other countries. For this reason, we feel it's of paramount importance to discuss and construct a resolution to the problem. These topics have been specifically chosen to target current issues that are ever developing and changing. They're complex, and we hope that they'll challenge the delegates to work together to the best of their abilities to find solutions that may be elusive. Most of all, we hope the delegates in our committee will enjoy engaging and exciting debates throughout the conference and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome the Health Committee.
Secretary General, fellow chairs, delegates, my name is Ed Day and I'm the head chair of the Health Committee. And ably assisted by my co-chairs Sean Warner and Zach Wagman, I'm looking forward to what will be my last MUN conference, and what a conference it shall be for the Health Committee. As we discuss pressing issues such as the spread of Ebola virus disease, delegates will be coming face to face with the issues that remain unsolved and trying to find new, innovative and I'm sure unique methods of dealing with them. The question of international drug trafficking will broaden the horizon of inexperienced delegates, encouraging them to cater for the needs of all countries, no matter how developed they may be, and to account for the huge cost incurred to those countries. Then, the reduction of the under-5 mortality rate will force delegates to consider the very human and ethical issues that underpin the Health Committee and make difficult choices in establishing what needs to be done to achieve the most effective outcome. We want delegates to engage with these topics, not only on a political or an economic level, but also on a human level, to understand that this is not about faceless corporations, nationalistic prejudices, or unnecessary bureaucracy. It is about the people who can and must be helped. It is the responsibility of the many to be held to account for the needs of the few, and we hope that delegates will come to realise this over the course of the weekend, and that we will see some of the brightest talent in MUN begin to shine through in the Health Committee. I would like to wish you all a fantastic weekend, and traditional HABSMUN style, some fruitful debate. Thank you very much.
And now the Security Council.
Unfortunately, for religious reasons, I can't use a microphone, but this weekend the Security Council is charged with solving two of the greatest issues facing our world today. The first of these is that of Islamic extremism in Iraq and Syria, a topic rightly dominated currently by the rise of Islamic State. Driven by a singular and indiscriminate aim to kill all those who disagree with them, they murder Muslims and non-Muslims alike, in recent months executing foreign nationals and journalists on video. The group claims to have great autonomy in the areas of Iraq and Syria, particularly, and it is also feared that by the day, their reach is extending into Libya and further afield. The Security Council therefore has the duty to take measures against the group, ensuring stability in the regions so far affected. We are also seeking remedies for other forms of extremism in the Middle East, including the infringement on women's rights in countries ruled by Sharia law, and vigilante groups such as Nusra Front.
The second topic on our agenda is the question of territorial disputes in East and Southeast Asia. A region containing 60% of the world's population, it has been described as a ticking time bomb, with tensions on a near-constant high, with lands carved up according to century-old treaties, remnants of colonial empires long since past. Military conflict is a very real threat of the territory here. Stands occur on a monthly basis, with almost every member nation in Southeast Asia being involved in military conflict over the last 50 years. It is up to the Security Council to hold a debate, and for international debate to be the starting point for new diplomatic communications and dialogue to be opened up between countries in this region, with the continued aim of holding up the United Nations' aim of ensuring peace globally.
Special Commission.
Honourable delegates, I'm delighted to be the head Special Commissioner this year, and along with my two deputies, Darcy Hill and Ewan Chu Graham, we will endeavour for the most productive and enjoyable weekend possible. Introduced just last year at HABSMUN, the Special Commission has jurisdiction over constitutional affairs. That is to say that the Special Commission decides what the role of the United Nations is as a whole, and what each arm of the UN can do. Debate is held in caucus, which means that instead of debating a resolution, we debate clauses and form a single resolution over the conference. Over the following weekend, we'll be debating the question of the role of the United Nations in combating national and transnational organised crime, a question which we're sure will yield fruitful and interesting debate. My deputy commissioners and I are really excited to be here, and we hope you are too. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all the chairs for their remarks. I'm now going to give a brief overview of the school charity which we as a conference will be supporting over the course of the weekend. Kids Care Tanzania is a small charity which has been run for 13 years by a Christian couple, Rob and Mary Norton. They have set up an orphanage on the edge of Dar es Salaam, which is home to 23 children, aged from 2 to 20, who all receive education and medical care, as well as a secure home for as long as they need it. Many of the children they care for have AIDS or are AIDS orphans. They have also established 5 preschools, 2 near the children's home in Dar es Salaam, 1 in a fishing village not far from the former slave trade centre of Bagamoyo, and 2 in a remote region on the border with Malawi. They presently provide basic sanitation for around 450 children, preparing them for the challenge of primary school. Their ultimate aim is for a rainbow of 7 nursery schools in needy areas of the country. After the opening ceremony, there will be collection tins in which you'll be able to make contributions to this charity, which will be held by Secretariat members, so we kindly request that you please give generously. We'd also like to remind delegates that you should be heading straight to your committee rooms tomorrow morning and not to wait around in the Bourne foyer area. Chairs will be ready to give registers at 9 o'clock sharp, and it'll be a shame if they start a committee debate without you. So without further ado, I'd now like to welcome Karan Kumar, Secretary General for HABSMUN 2015, to give the speech of the Secretary General. Please welcome Karan.
Honourable chairs, advisors, delegates. With the crisis in Ukraine continuing, the rise of ISIS in the Middle East, and the constant threat of cyber war, it is clear now more than ever that the world is facing a time where issues are arising bigger than any of those that we have seen in history. It is also true to say that many of these issues are not going to go away anytime soon. Indeed, whether you like it or not, delegates, we are to inherit these issues from our predecessors. Now, many of you in this room are going to go on to become future world leaders. Indeed, every single one of us in this room right now is a global citizen, and we will continue to be in the future. As such, it is our responsibility to tackle these issues in a way that is both constructive and fair. But why? We must do this, delegates, so that everyone, everywhere, may live in a society that is both free and prosperous, regardless of their gender, sexual orientation, religion, or nationality. Now, Model United Nations is amazing because it gives us the opportunity to try our hand at just this. It allows us to see multiple views on the same issues, making us more aware global citizens. But not just that, delegates. It gives us the opportunity to actually construct viable policy solutions to these issues. And best of all, we get to do all of this surrounded by like-minded individuals from around the world. I began my Model UN career 4 years ago, right here at HABSMUN. I recall being quite a timid delegate. In fact, I knew very little about global politics and MUN in general. Over my 4 years of MUN, I am honoured to say that I have grown from being that delegate to the Secretary General of this great conference. As an individual, I believe I've changed in many ways. I began MUN as someone whose interests lied mainly in science. You know, to me, molecules and cells, they just always seem more interesting than treaties or agreements. For one thing, through MUN, I've gained an immense appreciation for global politics and our leaders, the ones elected to represent us, and the decisions they make. I'm sure as you go about debate this weekend, you will see that it is difficult to make these decisions. It is difficult to come to an agreement. And secondly, I have gained an immense amount of personal confidence. Indeed, if it weren't for every single one of those conversations with delegates, points of information, or speeches in front of committees, I can assure you I would not have the confidence to address you all here today. And I certainly wouldn't have the confidence to organise this conference along with the incredible executive team that sits behind me. Now, it's also given me confidence in other things. It's also allowed me to use some particularly great one-liners in front of committees. Now, I'm sure that some of you have gone to committees before, and you see a resolution that's not so great. This has happened to me. And today I say, delegates, this resolution is like a skyscraper. It's just floor after floor after floor. That was actually more of a laugh than I was expecting, so thank you. But therefore, delegates, as you go about debate this weekend, I urge you to get to know as many people as possible. I urge you not to be afraid to share your point of view, even if you're new to MUN, even if you don't like speaking in front of crowds. Because, delegates, I can assure you that if you do this, you will have a fantastic time. Now, as I move on, I am aware that many of you may never have been involved with MUN before. Equally, I know that there are many of you in here who have been doing MUN for years. I sincerely hope that every single one of you, regardless of your personal experiences, leave this conference having been changed in some way. And more importantly, with the motivation to change the world in which you live. On behalf of myself, Zach, and the rest of the executive team, we hope you have a fantastic conference this weekend. And if there's one thing to take away from this speech, delegates, it would be to throw yourselves in, and more importantly, make this your Model United Nations. Thank you. Without further ado, I would like to call to the podium my fellow Secretary General and great friend, Zachary Land. It is with both a great sense of pride and excitement that I announce that this 7th annual Haberdashers Aske Boys School Model United Nations Conference is now in session.